Hi, and welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your guest host, Todd Pronto, interviewing the normal host of the show, Scott Wheeler, the publisher of the Northland Journal, and author, photographer, website archivist.
Jack of all trades, master of none. Now, what am I doing over here? It seems so much different. I'm used to sitting over there.
It is different.
Yeah, when I came to sit down, I said I have to sit over here because that's the host seat.
Right.
Now but I know we talked about having, I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people throughout the years and dozens on this show. I guess it was time to kind of turn the tables on me.
Find out what you're all about.
Right.
You've done, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but you've done well over 60 shows, haven't you?
Well, I think so. And
I think so too.
If you recall right, it was you who, for good or bad, who launched me on this career. Several years ago, you approached me about doing the Vermont Voice on WIKE.
Yep. And that's still going to this day.
That's still going. And then you asked me to come down here and do a show after you drifted down the road to NEK TV. And my first response was, no, I don't think so.
It took me about a year to get you here. Yeah,
I have a face, to be realistic, I have a face for radio, as they say. And
no comment.
I wanted to stay behind the mic, but finally you convinced me. And I came on, and I really enjoyed it because, not for myself, but it just serves as another forum for me to be able to help people tell their stories. It serves as a great forum for people. And because you've come to realize you have no clue who I'm going to bring in from time to time, do you?
No. Usually it's a day or so before.
Yeah, and usually, well, the good thing about today is usually my guests are here before I am, because I am never early about arriving here. Well, today the guest and the host arrived at the same time because technically I'm both.
Yeah, exactly.
I got here at the same time. But no, in all seriousness, the Vermont Voice and the Northeast Kingdom Voice does serve as none of my work is about me. It's about the Northeast Kingdom and its people. And a lot of times, I don't know have we had any famous people? I guess on my radio show I've had Luis Guzman.
Have you had Luis?
Yeah, I've had him.
Are you going to get him here?
But for the most part, my guests are, or the people I write about in the Northland Journal, they're ordinary people. But when we hear ordinary does not mean boring.
No.
And have you learned, though, over the years in your life, that a lot of the people who jump up and down and say they have something to say often have nothing to say?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like you've done tons of interviews on the radio, and sometimes the people you think are going to be great guests aren't that good. Right. Like this one. No, I'm just kidding.
In my March issue.
Is that the new one?
Yeah, that's my new one.
Yep.
I'll tell you, that's a perfect example. I went to my neighbor's house, Paul and Betty Lehar. They're about a mile and a half down the road.
Yep.
And I can't say I'm great friends with them, but I've known them for years. I sat down with them, and they're very humble people. I was going to do a piece on their sugar making operation that they have out in Albany, Lehar's Maple Ridge. And I sat down with them, and I realized how little I truly knew about them. Like Paul's mother was born on the Indian reservation at Odenak.
Really?
And the way Paul and Betty live in the house that Paul grew up in, that house was bought and paid for in a unique way. Paul's father would go out muskrat trapping.
Okay.
And he would bring home the muskrats, burlap bags full of muskrats, and his wife would then skin them, and he would stretch them, and they would sell them, and they would make their house payment once a year off the hides
Really?
of muskrats. And I don't know about you. Have you ever come? You don't live too far from the I think Willoughby River. I don't know if it has any muskrats.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not very far from there.
But I don't. I just found that so fascinating.
That's interesting.
Is
what if people use muskrat skin for, like, not clothing?
Sure.
Really?
Sure. And you know what? In talking to the older generations, especially the generations even before Lahars, you know, you ate what you could. People ate muskrats. I've had old timers tell me one of the best kinds of meats they had during the Depression was porcupine. They said it was a trick.
Really?
Yeah, it was a trick to, get at the meat because of the quills.
Sure.
So one person said what they would do is they would actually burn the quills, so then you could
They fall out or whatever?
Yeah, or they at least dull them a little bit, So you could eat your muskrats.
Well,
it doesn't sound appetizing
no.
to me.
But that's kind of, and that's what you do really, is you chronicle history, but you do it through the people that have lived it to tell it. And I've heard you say this before, that, you're always going to have new people to interview because we just keep getting older.
Right, we all do. Like, for example, a recent series was written by one of the founders of the Frog Run Farm, which was a commune during the 70s and 80s in Charleston. And she just wrote about what life was like as a back-to-lander in the Northeast Kingdom. And I have another article going in written by a reporter who went to Earth Peoples Park in Norton, and he kind of enjoyed. He went there on assignment, but he really liked it, and he stayed there for several years. Then he's writing an article for me. And so, although I really have an appreciation for the Depression era people, the World War II generation, that generation is disappearing. Now I'm scurrying about trying to capture those stories just because.
Sure.
But you know what is the commune generation, which is the same as the Vietnam generation, they're not, they're no longer young. They're up in their 60s themselves.
Sure.
And I'm, every once in a while I need to remind myself that I'm really not 25 anymore.
No.
And I'm knocking on the door to 50.
Are you?
That's a hard concept, but I don't look at age the same way some people might look at it. I know there's people who are in their 90s and they are living vibrant lives.
Sure.
Joe Queenan, who's been on my show, I think he's 90 or 91. He just started riding motorcycles a year or two ago. On the back of it, they dress him up like a senior citizen Harley biker.
Nice.
But then there's Ruth Austin, who's going to be turning 100, and she envisions herself quite the cribbage player, and I heard she is, but her memory is remarkable.
That's a good thing for you.
Yeah, well, it's like where our station here is located on East Main Street in Newport. When she was a kid, for the first 3-4 years, this was Main Street. West Derby.
Really?
Yeah. The east side of Newport in her youth was West Derby. It was the community of West Derby. It wasn't Derby, but it would. But then, eventually, it rolled over and was incorporated into the city of Newport.
Wow.
So, and she said that throughout growing up, there were people who refused to call this Newport because they were proud of West Derby.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. And that's what it would be.
That's interesting.
So there's a little bit of trivia for you.
Yeah, I'll have to remember that.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of history, is that something you were interested in school, or did you just kind of get into it? I know you worked as a reporter for years for the Chronicle, I believe.
The Chronicle.
Yeah.
Well, actually, my father if he'd only known, he could have had himself a show called The American Pickers long before they became a thing. Because my father, actually, he worked at Butterfield's,
Yeah.
and he also installed antennas, but he
Yeah.
was also a picker.
Was he?
And my father made more money and brought home more history than you would ever know.
Interesting.
And so I grew up in history, whether I liked it or not. And you know, with me, I can't say I particularly enjoy the history of history books. I like to be able to sit down and talk to my history, as in live in history. Like the old Stonehouse, they do an amazing job at capturing the bygone years of Orleans County, and that's how come we all work well together. 'Cause we all have niches. They deal with that, but I like to be able to sit down and talk to them. Like, I've interviewed some of the most wonderful human beings on this planet, but I've interviewed some people. Don't get me wrong. Most German soldiers who fought in World War II were decent human beings who were caught in a war that they wanted no part of.
Sure.
I've interviewed a fella who I believe is a hardcore, unrepentant Nazi. And just because I interview these people, any people, if I interview you doesn't mean I have to like you. It doesn't mean I have to agree with you. But
Right.
your story is very important. And so when you're like 85 years old, and I'm like 98, we'll sit down and we'll talk about your years in Nashville.
Oh, sure. If I can remember that.
Yeah. But
when I'm that age.
But it really is. It's so much fun listening to the stories and knowing that recording those stories are going to mean so much to future generations, whether we know it or not.
Sure.
Because a lot of the people I interview, we younger folks, we can't picture them ever young, because they're in their 80s and 90s and above.
Yeah. They had to start somewhere.
But they were once young. One of my buddies, Eddie Prano, was 17 years old. He was ferrying troops onto Omaha Beach during the D-Day invasion.
Yeah, I'm related to him.
Oh, that's right.
I don't remember exactly how, but on my father's side.
And he's explained that he spells the name right, and your family decided to anglicize.
Yeah, we decided to spell Pronto the way it makes sense, like it's easy to spell.
Right.
Instead, the French way, which is Pedanto,
Right.
which is how he spells it. I can't even spell that.
Right.
I can't even spell Todd.
Because you're a single T Todd, right?
Yeah.
And not a double T.
D.
D.
2 T's, 1 D.
Yeah.
So is that why you decided to do? I mean, how did you get the Northland Journal started? I know it was called the Kingdom Historical
right.
at first.
Right. And what happened was, if you talk to any English teacher, they're probably still saying, "How did he do that?" Because I wasn't a student. Let's be real. My kids, just a few years ago, my kids who are now grown found my report cards, and I did tell them. I said, "Well, no, C's and D's were, those were just mistypes. Those were actually A's and B's."
Oh, right.
No, I really wasn't a student, but I did like history.
Yeah.
And then, actually, it was history that helped launch my career. Is my mother, to make a long story short, my mother never knew her mother. My grandmother died of during the tuberculosis outbreak in I believe it was the 1930s, and my mother was only 3, and then the family lost all contact with her family, and my mother grew up not even knowing for sure where her mother was from, because her father had my grandfather met my grandmother in Massachusetts. They'd both gone there to work. Well, come to find out, my grandmother was a Newfie from Newfoundland.
Yeah.
And the part of the family moved to the Newfoundland branch. They stayed They stayed in Newfoundland and were big fishermen. And then her brothers, my grandmother's brothers, went to Nova Scotia, and they worked in the steel factories. And my grandmother did something that a lot of maritime women did. They would go to like Massachusetts and work in the straw and hat factories, make money, then send it home. But meanwhile, she met my father, my grandfather, who was from Irisburg, but he was down here working. Well, so to make a long story short again, since it's already long, is I ended up tracking them down, my mother's first cousins, and we went for a family reunion. And some of her first cousins didn't even know that she ever existed. And so I wrote an article for the Chronicle. Yeah. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I was working at Northeast Kingdom Human Services, but I submitted this article to the Chronicle, and it ended up launching my career. They ended up calling me up, say, hey, would you like to do a little freelance work? And my freelance work turned into full-time work. Yep. And I started off not having a clue what I was doing. Huh. And there's days I wake up in the morning and I don't know if I have a clue what I'm doing now, but I'm having a lot of fun doing it.
So when did the first issue?
The first issue, as April, I believe April of this year will be the beginning of our 13th year, in which I find amazing.
Really? Wow.
I do. I find it amazing that 13 years, the beginning of 13 years is here. Because, I don't know about you, but most people dread getting out of bed and going to work in the morning. Yeah. I absolutely love getting out of bed. I can't wait to work. I can't wait to do, it's work. And a lot of people don't understand that writing is work.
Oh, sure.
When I do some of my interviews, by the time even if it's only one segment long, it might be hours and hours of interview time. Yeah. And but the appreciation you get is phenomenal. The letters we get, and I always say we because the one person has always forgotten is my wife. My wife has a full-time job. Yep. But she's the one who does all the back of the scene. She is the one who has to remind me every once in a while. Okay, I'm really glad that you're having fun, but let's make a little money. Because the first 8 years, it wasn't. Well, actually, for the first 10 years, this was a hobby. Yeah. It was a sideline thing because I get to do my hobby and have a job at the same time. Sure. Yeah. No matter where I go, I always have my laptop with me. It's always attached to me. So if I'm in a airport and all of a sudden my flight gets delayed, I can just pop out my computer and go to work.
Start working, sure.
And the internet, can you imagine life without the internet now?
I really can't. And I'm just at the generation where the internet was in school when I was in school, but we hardly used it for anything. And then it wasn't until I got into radio that I got my first email address. And now, I can't imagine life without my iPhone, which you need to get, Scott. You could interview people, record them. You could type on your phone. It's the century. Well, your laptop is missing keys. I've seen it.
No, I have a brand new one.
Oh, you do? Okay.
No, brand new one. I finally got a new one, but it was funny. I remember saying to you one day, because you're a techie type guy.
Sure.
I says, Todd, I got to get a new tape recorder. He said, tape recorder? I said, yeah, because I interview people on a tape recorder. And I guess those kind of went extinct with the dinosaurs, and I didn't even realize it. And then you showed me how to convert my laptop into a recorder, and it's like, hey, that's great. Yeah. But a lot of people mistake me as somebody who knows something, but I know very little about technology. I just know how to do what I need to know how to do.
But you've used social media to really, you'll post something on Facebook and you'll have 53 comments within an hour.
I
And it
think-
can be anything.
I will say, I think I have the most active. The Northland Journal's website,
Right.
Facebook site, has
Right.
the most active site. It's probably the most active site in the Northeast Kingdom. And what I use that for is, a lot of, I can badmouth Facebook because I think some people really get stupid on Facebook.
I agree.
And I think there's probably a lot of family relations that are hurt because people don't understand what they're writing. But as far as a business goes, I have been able to connect with people around the world who used to live here. So if I have a question I'd like answered, if I put it out there, the most mundane question a lot of times, I can get an answer
Yeah.
from it. It has opened the world up to me. Like I even look back to that original search for my grandmother's family. That probably took me 2 years. I could do that same search now with the internet.
On Ancestry.com
Yeah,
or something.
Or I could probably, if it didn't take me a day, it wouldn't take me any more than a week.
Yeah.
Because
So you did this back in, what, the 90s or something?
Yeah. And so, I have, well, that's the other thing is we talk about how technologically slow I am, but on the other hand is we now have seniors well into their 80s and 90s who are plugged into the world.
Sure.
I have people, I have one fella who's like 96 and he grew up in Newport. He emails me, he's on Facebook. And then just recently, my beloved, I have a beloved aunt, and she just friended me. And she's in her, she must be nearing 90. And
That's great.
It really gives them an avenue, too, to connect with the world. Because as you get older, all your peers are dying. So you need to reach out to find the survivors. But
That's great. I mean, yeah. Now, when you started the journal, though, 13 years ago, so you probably weren't using the internet a whole lot back then.
We were just starting to use the internet. But
Like you'd email people.
When I worked at the Chronicle, when I first began, Chris Braithwaite and the Chronicle, they've pumped out a lot of reporters who've gone on to do great things.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing about Chris, who actually the Chronicle turns 40 this year,
I saw that.
and Chris always tried to pay his workers well, and he would sometimes cut corners when it came to his life and to the office so he could pay his work well. We were always behind on the technology. When I arrived at the Chronicle, we had gotten the latest, greatest computers. They were old Macintosh, and it was like looking through a periscope that you were sitting there, your face was glued right to the screen, because it really was almost like looking into a periscope. But we never complained because we thought it was just like great technology. Now are you too young to remember when cassettes first came out?
When they first came out, I mean, I had cassettes, of course, but
what about 8-tracks?
I've had 8 tracks because my parents still had some, and my first car had an 8-track player in it.
I really didn't think. I remember when 8-tracks are in. You can't get any better than 8 tracks. What are they going to do?
It's like the worst thing that they ever came out with.
and now you got cassettes, and one thing I'm really glad to see disappearing now. The CDs, DVDs, because you scratch one of those things,
and it's over,
and it's over with. And now it's going more towards the hard drive. And who was it who encouraged me to go to hard drives? Portable hard drives. That was you again.
So basically, what we've learned in this whole interview is, what would you have done without me?
Well, technically, I guess
I gave you 2 shows. I taught you how to record on a laptop, store stuff on a hard drive. I think you should hire me.
Well, on the other hand, let's tell the listeners, that show you got me into, on the radio, and this show, like, what's my combined pay for doing both shows once a week?
I believe it cost you money and gas to drive and do the shows.
I get paid. These shows are completely voluntary. But I've always looked at them, and they're voluntary money-wise, but just being able to help the people get the word out, getting their message out. Like, just the people I've had come in here. We've had people come in with different messages, whether it was, we have that. We have the woman who does board games.
Yep.
Well, that wasn't the most exciting show, but some people liked it. But then we had a person who had dwarfism, and she wanted to explain about what it was like to have dwarfism. And then just recently, another show, it wasn't really action-packed, but we had 2 members of the school board came on, and they talked about an upcoming bond vote.
Yeah, and this show actually is going to air on town meeting day, so it's relevant, Scott.
Right. And I just...
my favorite one was when you had World War II, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. Right. That was really cool.
Yeah, because you know what was really cool about that one, too? Technology. Lindy Palin, who is... like 92, but don't you wish you could look that good at 92?
I see him at the golf course, and I think, I know I'm not going to be golfing when I'm 92. I don't even have as good as a swing as he does now.
But here he was a B-17 pilot during World War II, and he wasn't up there texting his family back home. But then you have
BRB, LOL.
and then John Wilson, the president of the Newport Council, he was a combat veteran of Vietnam, and he said that if their technology was like Lindy's, how did they communicate with their families? It was done in letters.
A letter, yeah.
And so Dana LaPlante, who's been in Afghanistan and Iraq and around the world, he said, yeah, we're out in the field or something, and we can text home.
Yeah, on the iPhone or whatever. Yeah.
And Lindy and John found that totally fascinating, and they
probably had to wait 2-3 weeks or something.
John just said that he questioned whether you'd want to stay in contact that much, because you don't want to get your mind up. And he said that because in Vietnam they were deep in the jungles. It was dark. He said, I could just picture myself sitting there waiting for the enemies passing, and he said all of a sudden my iPhone goes off, and he just said that he sees they both saw benefits of it, but they also saw
I could see that.
But that was a good show, and actually in another week or two we're having another member of the Greatest Generation come on. His name is Charlie Smith. I believe he's from Craftsbury. And Charlie is in his 90s, still driving, still very much with it. And he was in Patton's army during World War II. And his claim to fame, he said his tank was the first tank to cross the Rhine River during the war. So during the move on Germany. So he's coming on. But yeah, you just never know who's coming.
No, a lot of interesting people.
But,
I know we're going to have to wrap it up in a few minutes, but one thing I think we need to talk about is you've become a TV star, not just here on NEK TV.
I'm no star.
Well, you've been on TV.
Right. Right. I've been on several programs, the Chronicle out of Boston. I've been on the History Channel and a few others, and I'm working with another network on. These programs are not about me. I actually, most of the time, I don't push them away. What I do is, no, you don't want to talk to me. Because a lot of people think I know a lot more than I do. Believe me, I have teachers who will confirm to you that's true. I don't know as much as people think I do. What I do is I try to redirect them to, I'll find out what their mission is.
Sure.
And I will help direct them to who they're looking for, because a lot of times the media has a tendency to chase each other around and interview the same people, and a lot of times those aren't the right people.
Yep.
The ordinary people are often left out, or the working Vermonter is they're left out, and their voices are drowned out if they say anything by people who have nothing to say, but they just do a lot of so I direct people like I was recently in Yankee Magazine, but I dragged a lot more local folks along, because as I said, I want, especially the Northeast Kingdom, we are changing. There's no doubt about it. For good or bad, we are changing. That's why it's important to preserve our history now, because I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see a great change. In saying that, though, I think it's very important that people be given a voice to not only share their memories, but to voice what they want to see. Because too often, we hardcore Northeast Kingdomites have just sat back and been steamrolled, because most of us, we just want to live and let live. We are very welcoming to outsiders. It's like during the 60s and 70s, there was a whole back to the land movement. Communes sprung up around here.
Sure.
And for the most part, Vermonters embraced the commune folks, and they embraced us. It was that kind of a give and take. We were here for this kind of the same reasons. Not everybody moves here because they love it. They're moving here now because they're escaping something. As a Northeast Kingdom resident, I respect cultural diversity. I think it's great, but on the other hand, people also need to respect our culture.
Sure.
And, but no, it's been a blast. If I were to be run over by an 18-wheeler today, I can say I've lived a darn good life. And somebody once asked me, if you wanted to be remembered for one thing, what would it be? And I said, well, I would like to be remembered as a person who helped give, ordinary people a voice. And that is what my writing is about. That is what volunteering on these shows about, because you're about the closest to famous that's been here. And the quote famous people, they have plenty of publicity. They do.
Sure.
But there's so many people right here in the Northeast Kingdom who have done amazing things. Even if it's just the sheer act of surviving the Depression, because I'm going to tell you, it isn't only your generation, it isn't only the younger generations, it's my generation. For the most part, we have no idea what hard times are like.
Right.
And sometimes I catch myself whining about things, and I think, get a grip, Scotty. Get a grip.
Yeah, I could see that.
So.
Well, awesome. Well, it's been fun talking with you. Congratulations, 13 years. The Northland Journal's a teenager now.
And I don't know, but teenagers can act up.
I know, this might be...
It's amazing as we transition. And in the future, we will once again have you as a guest on the Northeast Kingdom Voice.
Hey, I'll be sitting in that chair.
Right.
Well, thank you much. And thank you to tuning in to another edition of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.